Savvy Central Radio, drawing out the best from our guests, with host Christina Nitchman.
Savvy Central Radio is proud to present a live interactive series featuring a new mix to business networking and interviews. Our first event will take place Saturday, April 18th from 12 noon to 3 p.m. You'll not want to miss our first guest, Bryn Johnson. Our interview question portion of the event will be concluded by a business networking gathering of light fare and cocktails, where you'll be able to meet new and exciting like-minded business owners like yourself. To find out more, book your free ticket today at bit.ly/savvy event. That's bit.ly/savvy event. Hello everyone, and welcome to Savvy Central Radio. This is your host, Christina Nitchman. Each week on Savvy, we host successful individuals and business owners, inviting them to share their dreams, stories, wisdom, and lessons learned in their field of business. Our guest today is Marc Mawhinney, the Coach's Coach. Marc is also the host of the very popular podcast, Natural Born Coaches, the daily podcast for your coaching business. Marc is passionate about helping coaches get more clients and build stronger coaching businesses. Today, Marc discusses what it takes to build a successful coaching business and how to find your target market and niche. To find out more about Marc, visit naturalborncoaches.com. Hi, Marc. Welcome to Savvy Central Radio. How are you?
I'm good, Christina. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm happy to have you today. You are a coach to coaches, and as we discussed prior, many of our listeners are coaches and consultants, so they're right up your alley, and they can totally relate to what you're doing out there. But tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you came to being the coach's coach, and starting your very successful podcast, Natural Born Coaches.
Yeah, it's always tricky to answer that question because I'm not sure how far back to go. I could start right in the hospital room, back way back when, 1978. I'll start with young adulthood. Basically, my background's in real estate is where I started when I was right out of university and got started in real estate and spent over a decade building a company there and adding a lot of people to my team and doing a lot of business. My journey into coaching really came from a business closure. I went through a lot of good years with real estate. Then at the end of it, it was bad years, and went through a business closure. And I was helped to my feet, back to my feet, by several coaches and mentors who were really important in my life. They came at the right time for me and got me back up and back rolling. And I thought, wow, with what these people did for me, I'd love to have that same kind of impact on other people as well. So I'd always loved personal development, thought highly of the whole industry, and I thought, wow, I'd love to be a coach. And that's where I got into coaching. Now, that in itself's a story, too, because when I started coaching, I had a very broad focus, which was too broad. Mm-hmm. I said, I'll be a business coach and I'll help any entrepreneur, which didn't get me the traction that I wanted. And then it was as time went on, I realized I had to choose a niche, and I niched down to focus solely on coaches. And then that's where the podcast came from and led to where we're at today.
That's awesome. So was it a many-year process where you got into the self-help industry and learned about yourself? And how did it come that you were drawn to that particular niche?
Well, I've really been involved in personal development since I was in high school. I picked up Think and Grow Rich, of course, Napoleon Hill, and that just opened my eyes to the whole new world, and that's what really got me into business with real estate. So even in all those years of doing real estate, in my spare time, I was reading the motivational self-help books. And I mean, I'd go to the beach, I'd have a handful of about 10 books, that I brought to the beach with me because I wasn't sure which one I was going to want to read, or maybe I'd read a few of them. And I was just really addicted to the whole idea, notion of bettering yourself. So I couldn't really see that clearly when I was in real estate because I had my mind wrapped around, okay, well, it's got to be that bricks and mortar on the ground business of real estate, and that's what it's got to be. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting with the business closure and then the rise of the internet and people doing business virtually and becoming more accepted, they sort of intersected at the right time for me when you could actually nowadays run a business virtually. And pretty near all my clients, except for a handful of them, aren't local. I deal with a few people in my local market, but for the most part, it's coaches all over the world. Mm-hmm. And that's how where coaching came about, it, which I absolutely love, by the way, being able to run a business with a laptop and Skype and a few things, as you know.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a fabulous time in the business world that allows so much more expansion than in prior. You were kind of stuck more in a bricks and mortar type of business. There wasn't alternative until the net came to be. And you're right, it's amazing. And you're a man after my own heart because I run around with a big backpack full of books and people are like, why are you carrying around a big backpack all the time? It's because I like to read and I always want different reading material. So
Yeah, it's nothing against reading on iPad or Kindles or anything, but I do like having a hard copy. I'm the type I like to physically highlight and write notes and bend pages and all that fun stuff. So I do read digitally and I do read those types of books as well. But I haven't gotten away from the hard covered books either.
No, I'll always love those first. But I like what you said prior, Mark. You got me thinking because for me as well, when I started my business, I didn't pay much attention to who my target market was. I was just like, okay, I serve all small businesses. And it gets to a point where you can't serve everyone because then you're just like a big net spread way too far out. Now, I know you help coaches with finding their niche and their target market, but why is this so important to get clear on finding your niche and discovering who you're serving in particular?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with what you said is when you're not clear on who that niche is, and it's very very loosey-goosey, kind of fuzzy, and it's difficult to get your head up above the crowd. If you're dealing with a ton of, if you say, I'm a business coach, or I'm a life coach, or, I'm a financial coach, or anything, there's just so much competition there, and to get your head above the crowd, it's going to take either a lot of money, which a lot of coaches don't have, like Coca-Cola and Apple, where you can throw billions of dollars at a very wide market. Those companies can make it work because they've got huge budgets, but coaches don't have those kind of budgets. So you either can get around it by spending a ton of money, or spend that time and hope to get some sort of lucky break along the way. So it's not that there's people who have general markets aren't successful. You see there are people that get through it, but the odds are definitely stacked against you if you take a very general approach. I prefer doing something where you focus on a tighter market. You get that traction, you become known in that market, and then you can branch out into some other things as time goes on. So you look at Gary Vaynerchuk, although he's not specifically a coach, he had a very tight niche in the early stages with online wine videos, basically, at a time when it wasn't done much. And then he got traction with that, and they became very well known. And of course, he wrote Crush It, and then he branched out into more of a general marketing, social media marketing message. But he wouldn't have been able to have that impact of Crush It and his other books had he not gotten the traction first with a tighter market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I found for myself, Mark, that early on when I would go to networking events and I said, oh, okay, I'm a financial consultant, they would ask me, okay, how do you serve your client? And it was hard for me to put it into words. And that's a problem. You have to be able to describe to people what makes you different. How do you actually serve your clientele? And I think really getting clear on your niche and your target market helps you do that.
Exactly. Yeah, you should be able to spit it out very quickly and clearly who you service. If I ask someone who's your ideal client, then it becomes a 5-minute monologue, and really they're not clear on it, then I know that they're probably having difficulty with their business because they're not clear on their target client.
Yeah, and I've also found that if I have someone come to me and want to be a guest on my show, if they can't tell me in a couple sentences very clearly what they do, we can't have them on because they're not going to be able to help my audience, and I'm not going to be able to help them because people are going to be confused about what they're all about.
Exactly. And I mean, the same thing goes for podcasting, which there's a lot of parallels I find between podcasting and coaching, just for examples. But if you look at a podcast, my podcast is very clear with Natural Born Coaches. It's, it's a 7-day-a-week daily podcast to help inspire and educate coaches to build stronger businesses. Bang, that's it. Mm-hmm. So anyone looking at it knows from seeing the title, Natural Born Coaches, and then that short sentence exactly what the show is about. But you see other podcasts where you can't tell it's a real mouthful to get the title out, or it's like Atlas Shrugged length, the description, thousands and thousands of words to try to describe it. Yeah. And people just don't have that time nowadays. Our attention span as humans is something like 9 or 10 seconds. We're not going to take too much time trying to decide what Christina's show is about if she doesn't tell us right away. People want to know right away, and they want something that's very clear and handed to them.
Wow, that's interesting, Mark. When you mention that, that brings me to mind how much our society has changed to be so kind of fast food society. We want everything quick, wham, bam, get it to me, the information as quickly as possible. And I've seen something that I don't know if you've seen, but a new type of genre in books and media, which is a multimedia book, where it's an audio book, a visual book, and video book all wrapped into one.
It'll wash your car. It'll cut your lawn.
Yeah, right.
Pick up your groceries. Yeah, I've noticed that as well. Definitely people want to get immersed in it. And the first time I ever saw that years ago, where there was bonus content from a website, I thought, oh my gosh, like that was really out of the ordinary for something like that. It seemed so cool just to get all this bonus content. Nowadays, it's almost come to be expected with books, or for a lot of them. Yeah. And I'm also finding for me, this goes back to us not having the attention spans. Unless I really like a book, if I'm not really sold on that book, or if I'm lukewarm on it, I'm probably not going through and doing the online content either.
Wow. Yeah, that's very, very telling. Is there anyone out there who is either writing a book as a coach can do to keep their audience attention, perhaps besides just putting in extra content and bonus?
Well, from what I've seen, I mean, I'm working on my book currently. So from just doing some research and talking to people who are in that world, a couple things. I don't think people nowadays want to have the 500-600 page book that's going to take a long time to get through. And it was said recently from a guest on my podcast. She said that people want a book that can be read in a 2-hour plane ride, basically, or on a two-hour plane ride. So not saying you have to do a 50-page micro book, but you got to be careful going through. It's something like, say, Tony Robbins in his latest book, Money, Master the Game, is just an enormous, he put a ton of research into it, and it's a huge book. I'm not sure if you've read it or not.
Not yet.
But I've been chipping away at it. It's been on the nightstand, and I'll get a little bit done at a time. But it's if that wasn't Tony Robbins, I probably wouldn't be reading that book.
Yeah.
And just because I have so much respect for Tony Robbins. And I think it's an important lesson for coaches, that you have to be very clear with what you're giving the person in a book. Don't put a lot of fluff in there and just think, oh, I got to pad it up till it gets to 300 or 400 pages. Just put the good stuff in there that draws people in.
Wow, thanks for that tip. That makes so much sense. I get a lot of books to read, as I'm sure you do as a podcaster and broadcaster. And sometimes it's so painful because it's just that 300 pages mostly of fluff. And when I read it, I'm like, you know what? This is really condensed. All the actual material is about 50 pages, maybe 100. And they're just trying to make an actual quote-unquote book, and people see that as being several hundred pages, but really, you really lose your audience at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I just recently reread The Four Agreements with Don Miguel Ruiz, and that book isn't very long at all. I don't know, maybe it's 100 pages or so, and it's like bigger type, and it's not a huge, you could probably read that book in an hour or less. Mm-hmm. And but look how powerful that's been. That book's been mentioned by a number of guests on the podcast, because one of the questions I ask is what books had a big impact on you. And The Four Agreements is right out there with Think and Grow Rich, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and others. So you don't need to write this huge thing that's good, can be used as a doorstop, or a paperweight, or if you want to crush a mosquito that lands on your wall or something. And just put something in there that people can get value from, and don't worry too much about fluffing it up and putting too much padding in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know you work with a lot of coaches and helping them get clear on their niche and target market. What have you seen as some of the major faux pas or mistakes among coaches with getting their businesses up and running?
Well, that's the first ones, that they don't choose a tight niche or niche. I'm showing my Canadian ask here by saying niche.
Is that Canadian? I didn't know that.
Yeah, my understanding, most Canadians and Europeans I talk to say niche, and then my Americans say, what the heck's a niche? It's a niche. So niche, tomato, I guess. That's the biggest problem, is that they don't pick something. And there's a couple of reasons for that. From when I talk to people, there's a real hesitation with coaches to choose a tighter niche, because for a couple of reasons. First, they say, well, I don't want to limit my potential clients.
Yeah.
I don't want to restrict people. So I want to stay very general, and then I can work with any of the however million people fit into that. And that's really faulty thinking, because by picking a tight niche, you're going to be attracting people, because there's going to be so few people that actually are helping that segment of the population. So a good example is there's a coach that was on my show recently, and he used to be an executive coach, which, of course, there's so many executive coaches. He was just fighting with the mob of coaches to get to these executives. And he flipped it around. He changed it that he was going to start working with the wives of successful executives. And those wives that felt like they've been in the background, kind of in the shadows, they've put their dreams on hold for years while she's supporting her husband. Well, now he was going to be a coach specifically for the wives of executives, and help them build their dreams and do what they want to do in life. And I thought that was a neat way to kind of stay in that same executive coaching world, but just kind of flip it on its head and choose a tight niche within it. And he was telling me he's got people just coming to him because there's no competition, or very little competition that he's up against that services that particular niche. So that's one of the problems, is that they focus, that they're worried that they're not going to have that general market that they can service. The other thing that I hear from coaches, they say, well, I don't want to choose that niche because I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. I don't want to work with, I'm trying to think of an example of a tight niche. So let's say if you become, your niche is good, you're going to help small business owners get their mornings off to a powerful start. You're going to work on just that hour of power, kind of when they first wake up, to really make sure it's a powerful way to wake up, and that you're going to become the morning guy, the morning coach. Well, they're worried. They're like, well, I don't want to be the morning coach for the rest of my life. And again, I tell them, you don't have to stay that way for the rest of your life. But if you keep going the way you're going, you're going to be out of business, or you're going to starve. So focus in there, and then who knows what opportunities are going to come down the road. And I mean, those are a few of the main excuses, but I'm hearing lots of other ones that coaches come in for. So that's a main mistake that they have, is that they're not having a laser-like focus with their market, and then they're not attracting clients to them because they're so fuzzy on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure, like you mentioned, it's probably that idea of I don't want to be typecasted for the rest of my life as the morning coach.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be. I find, and this is interesting, when I first started my first business, financial consulting, I was really, really scared to make the transition because I thought people wouldn't follow me. But in essence, Savvy Central Radio kind of organically became a business, because while I was still doing the financial consulting, people were already coming to me asking, hey, how can I get on your show and do advertising? So it was already starting to monetize itself without me even focusing on it. I just had to really jump in with both feet and say yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then the other thing you mentioned with people out there going, okay, I don't want to limit myself. I had someone who I was talking to who said, I want to serve the coaches or people who are going through seizures, who have epileptic seizures, because he goes through it. And he said, but it's only 1% of the population. And if I serve that 1% of the population, I'll never make money. But I thought about it. I looked at the numbers and I said, well, 1% of the population is 300,000 people. I think if you even got, 20 people depending on how much you charge for your coaching per year to work with you, depending on your price point, you could definitely make a lot of money with just that 1%. And we're just talking the United States.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think when you start really looking at what you're talking about and what that particular niche is that you're trying to hit, 1% of a population could be a huge number.
Right. Well, you have to niche till it hurts. Now, that being said, you can go so far that it's getting a little ridiculous. If you came out and you said, I'm going to work with left-handed dentists in Idaho who have just recently gone through divorce and are planning on selling their business in the next 6 to 9 months. There's my target, very clear, very specific. So bring on the clients. I'm ready to service them. Well, you're probably not going to get many clients. Now, who knows, maybe there is one left-handed dentist in Idaho that fits that. I feel bad for him. I don't want him working on my mouth if he's got all that on his mind. But, that's a little bit too far when it comes to niching till it hurts. But there's so many opportunities. I had a few guests on the show, their team known as the Anxiety Coaches, Kevin and Kelly, and they have a successful podcast called the Anxiety Coaches Podcast. And they were on the show talking about their particular niche for coaching. They both experienced issues with anxiety in the past, and they got through that. And they want to help people who are dealing with similar issues. And it was interesting because they were telling me they have very little competition for what they do. There's a small group of coaches that specialize in that. And so it's not, and it's actually a bigger niche than they thought it would be. They were telling me some stats. I think it's something like 1 in 4 North Americans deal with anxiety, and then right currently, by sometime in their lives, something like 1 in 3 are going to deal with anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the other stuff. So your niche may actually be bigger than you think once you get digging in there and kind of exploring it.
Oh, wow. That's really good point there, Mark. And I know we talked prior to our interview together how important follow-up and follow-through is to the success of your business as a coach. And I don't know about you, but I've exhibited with a lot of coaches and businesses I've worked with that there's something lacking, in particular in the coaching industry.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I think a big problem with follow-up and follow-through is we've got so much going on now with distractions that it's easy to get knocked off course. So I don't know about you, but when I have my list to do things and I start doing something, and then all of a sudden my Facebook pops up that I got a message from someone, and then something else happened, and then the toast is done from the toaster, and if you're not, you have to be really, really rigorous and focused on what you're doing, because if not, you're gonna have 5 things pop up that suddenly throw you off course. And I think that's what happens with coaches, and it happens with probably every entrepreneur out there. So follow-up is huge for me. When I do my follow-ups, I'll turn the phone off, notifications off, and I'm like, okay, I've got 2 hours where I've got to follow up with people who I've spoken with in the last few months that were interested in hiring me, and just following up with those people. But if I didn't block that time off and put it in as an appointment, then it probably wouldn't get done. There's so many other things that you can do that can distract you.
Yeah, that's a really good point, to actually shut down all your distractions, such as the phone or Facebook, because it'll go ting or whatever the sound is, and you're like, ooh, who wrote me?
Exactly. Well, there's an awesome book, which is probably the book when it comes to the topic of flow, and it's actually called Flow. By Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Try saying that 3 times fast. He's sort of known as the flow guy, and he wrote an amazing book, and it's just really interesting. It talks all about how people can get into a state of flow, and we don't realize how dangerous these distractions are from taking us away from a state of flow. When you get knocked off course and you get out of that state of flow, to try to get back into it's very difficult. So distractions don't seem like a big thing for us, because we're like, oh, well, it's just a Facebook message. I'll take 30 seconds to respond back, then I'll get back to the book I was working on or whatever. But they are very dangerous, and they can hurt our business a lot if they're not kept under control.
Yeah, and I've heard research that says that once you are distracted, it takes a period of time to get back into focus into what you were doing. I don't remember what the period of time was.
I've heard 21 minutes. I mean, I don't know if that's recent or if that's up to date, but I've heard it can be 21 minutes.
Well, that's a huge amount of time just wasted right there. And wow, for me, what's been a big help, besides shutting down distractions, like when I'm on the phone with you or anyone else doing an interview or something else, is I do shut down other distractions. But as well, I keep a spreadsheet. So afterward, because I'm a spreadsheet queen being in finance, so I write down who I talk to, basically what they're interested in. Interested, not interested, yes. And then I put up a follow-up date, and then at the end of the day, I shut down the spreadsheet and go back to it and put everything into my calendar when to follow up with them. So for me, that's kind of helped with my flow. Do you have any tips for any coaches out there who are having difficulty keeping up with the flow and follow-up?
Well, one thing I started doing recently is I've been starting to do a lot of batching. And I read the book called Essentialism by Greg McEwen, and it talks about a lot of those strategies. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm setting aside days or certain parts of days for certain tasks. So a good example with my podcast, it's a daily podcast. So I have to record 365 shows in the run of a year, which is a lot of shows. And rather than recording them through the week where I say, okay, I'm going to do, and maybe I have 2 on Monday and 1 on Tuesday and 3 on this day and 1 on that day, which was happening when I first launched the podcast. Mm-hmm. I've changed my online calendar that my recordings take place only on Tuesdays. And so I batch a number of them together. So I'm recording close to 10 on a Tuesday. Because you could get a cancellation, something's happened or so, but at least I'm keeping pace with enough for a daily show because I'm recording more than 7 every week. Mm-hmm. And that way my mind keeps in that interview focus and flow, and I'm not changing around. So what I don't want to happen later in the week is if I've set time aside to follow up with prospects, and then all of a sudden in the middle of that time, I'm like, oh shoot, I have to record that interview that I'm doing with Christina, and then it takes me off of whatever it was I was doing. So for me, I keep Mondays a very heavy day for coaching clients. Tuesday is blocked for recordings. That's and I'll check in, on emails and things. If I've got a few minutes in between, I may check in once or twice a day, but not much. And then there's certain time set aside for writing my email newsletter later in the week, my blog posts, my videos, and so on. And I encourage people, I've got a video on YouTube. If you check the Natural Born Coaches YouTube page or go to naturalborncoaches.com, I've got a couple of videos talking about time management, and I have one in particular that talks about batching.
Great. That's a really huge tip. And what's on the horizon for you guys? What do you have planned for the next year?
Well, lots of things going on for the next year. I've got some webinars I'm working on now. We're putting the final touches on, and that's going to be launched soon. So that's exciting because I'm kind of late to the webinar game. I've been on guest on webinars before, and I've been in there checking out webinars, but I've never actually been doing my own webinars. So those are about to get rolling with that, and that's pretty exciting. I've got the book that I'm working on as well, so I'm getting as much information out of my head and from my experience with talking to, about 1,000 coaches a year on air and off air, and I'm getting that into a book form to get it out, and that's geared really towards newer coaches, people who are thinking of becoming coach or they're in that first couple years of being coaches as well. So those are just a couple things. And I'm going to the moon later in the year. That's the other thing.
Going to the moon. I'm going to join you. No.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. No moon, but I am doing the other things.
Wow, that's so cool. Because I always had a dream that if it were possible, I would so do space travel. And my friends joke, well, we'll be the ones saying bye-bye on the outside of the ship.
Yeah, well, call Richard Branson, and hopefully he'll get up in the air with what he's doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope in our lifetime it is possible.
Yes.
Well, I'm so excited for you, Marc. This is really awesome. Please keep everyone updated. How can they find out about your upcoming workshops, your books, work with you, find out more about your podcast? Go to naturalborncoaches.com. Is that the best place?
Yeah, that's the best spot for sure. Yeah, that's a central hub for everything. Love connecting with audience, with people on social media as well. So please reach out.
You betcha. Well, before we head on out here, is there any last words you'd like to leave with our audience?
The main thing I'd leave with people is there have been lots of things we've talked about today when it comes to distractions and so on. But the big key is just get started with whatever you're doing. I think nowadays it's so noisy with technology, the internet. There's so much research you could do when you're about to start a business that you could end up not getting started. And I think the bigger thing is just get started now and not worry. And I'll leave you with a quote from, I believe it was General Patton, that said that a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan done next week. And I agree with that. So just get started with whatever you're doing, make your mistakes, learn from them, and keep going.
I love that quote. It makes so much sense. I've heard a lot of my friends say, oh, well, as soon as I finish researching and 2 years down the line, where are you at? Well, I'm still on it. Maybe next year or the year after I'll launch my first workshop. It's like, no time like today. Just launch it. You make mistakes. That's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Exactly. I mean, my podcast, I got started and launched it in a matter of... Now, I did a lot of research and study, but I crammed it into a short period of time, and it may have been tops 2 months of doing a ton of research. And now I've seen other people spend a year, 2 years or so researching a podcast. I'm thinking, what the heck are you doing? Are you building I don't know what the heck you're doing with your podcast. It's something different than any podcast I've seen if it's taking a couple of years. So it shouldn't take that long. Just get in there and get started.
Yeah, and everything's a learning process. You're not going to be perfect. I did my first live event a couple years ago, and they weren't perfect, but it was such a learning experience. I mean, for me, I'm a very kinesthetic learner, so I have to feel it and learn it and get it in my body. So for me, actually doing it, making the mistakes, being okay with making the mistakes, allow me to really learn the quickest.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Marc, it's been awesome having you out here today on Savvy and sharing your wisdom. Thank you so much for coming to Savvy Central Radio.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Savvy Central Radio is proud to present a live interactive series featuring a new mix to business networking and interviews. Our first event will take place Saturday, April 18th from 12 noon to 3 p.m. You'll not want to miss our first guest, Bryn Johnson. Our interview question portion of the event will be concluded by a business networking gathering of light fare and cocktails, where you'll be able to meet new and exciting like-minded business owners like yourself. To find out more, book your free ticket today at bit.ly/savvyevent. That's bit.ly/savvyevent.